All right. Does anybody here have a group project horror story? I feel like anyone who's ever done a group project has a bad experience doing group projects, unless you're okay with doing all the work and letting others ride your coattails. So I have a group project, not horror story, but just an annoying story. When I was in college, I had to do a group project for a marketing class, and my partner for this group project didn't show up for multiple of the days. So I had to work on it by myself, okay? Not a big deal. I was used to that sort of thing because group projects are the worst, all right? And so I did it, but then after we turned in our group project, there was an evaluation that we had to submit on our partner's work on the group project. And my partner said that I didn't do enough work for the group project when I had done not all the work, but I had done multiple days of work by myself because she would not show up to class. Thankfully, my professor understood and could verify that I had done multiple days of work by myself, and it did not affect my grade. Group projects are the worst because somehow most group projects, unless there's a way to very clearly articulate who does what and grade individually, group projects are tough because everyone receives the same grade for work that isn't always distributed evenly. Group projects are the worst because we are a people, we like justice, right? We like what's fair. We want what we think we deserve, and this makes us frustrated when others get more than they deserve. But in today's passage, Jesus tears down this prideful idea, the idea that anyone deserves the kingdom of heaven. And so last week, everyone give Caden a round of applause for teaching last week. Thank you, Caden. So Caden taught on Matthew chapter 19, which is the rich young ruler. And in this story, Jesus tries to help the rich young ruler to follow him and calls him to sell all of his possessions, give to the poor, and to follow Jesus. And the rich young ruler is unable to let go of what he valued most, which was not Jesus, it was his wealth and his status. And so Jesus explains that it's impossible for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And so the disciples ask, well, then who can enter the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus replies, well, with God, all things are possible. And it's not because of what the wealthy man deserves, but instead because of God's grace. It's not what any of us deserve to enter the kingdom of heaven, but it is only by God's grace. And so Jesus had just told the rich young ruler that by giving up his earthly wealth, he would instead gain treasure in heaven. And so Peter, going off of this idea, thinks about it and goes, hey, Jesus, if that's true, we've given up everything. Just like you told him to do, like we've left our father and mother. We've sold our possessions. We did follow you. What are we going to get when we come into the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus confirms to Peter and the disciples that for their sacrificial service to the Lord, they will receive great honor and reward. They may be last on the totem pole in this life, but in the kingdom of heaven, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And this seems like it would be a nice conclusion to this teaching, that you could just tie a bow, move on to the next section. But Jesus wants to clarify exactly what he means. So he continues with a parable in Matthew chapter 20. So let's start reading, beginning in verse 1. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, 'You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you.' So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, 'Why do you stand here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You go into the vineyard too.'" So I'm very upset because I just realized that I forgot to bring a denarius. I actually have one that I bought in Israel. So maybe I'll bring it next time so you guys can see it. But it's a real coin from the 1st century, which is super cool. But a denarius is 1 day's wage for a laborer. Okay, so it's payment for one day's work. And so Jesus in the early morning finds some laborers who want to work, or sorry, not Jesus, the master. All right. And so he agrees that for one day's work, he will pay them one day's wage. Well, apparently the master's vineyard needed a lot of help because shortly after he goes out to find more laborers. And so in the third hour, which was 9 a.m., he goes out and finds more laborers. The 6th hour, which is 12 p.m., the 9th hour, which is 3 p.m., all the way to the 11th hour, he goes and continues to hire workers. Well, sunset, which would have been the end of the workday, would have been about 6 o'clock. All right, so these 5 p.m. workers don't get much time to actually work in the vineyard. Throughout the entire day, even to the last hour, the master continues to hire more and more workers, continuing in verse 8. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day in the scorching heat." Okay, so think about this like a group project. You'd be mad too, right? You're telling me that I wrote the paper, I made the poster, I made the PowerPoint, and these guys get to come put their names on the cover sheet and they get an A? How's that fair? That's not deserved. How is it that these final laborers are made equal to the original laborers? And the thing is that you need to understand is that the kingdom of heaven is not a group project where people are given what they deserve. If people are given what they deserve, then the reality is no one deserves the kingdom of heaven. Amen? No one deserves to enter into God's kingdom. And so the master responds to even those grumbling, the original laborers, with patience. He calls them friend. Look what he says in verse 13. He said, when he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last." Verse 16 is Jesus explaining again this concept that the kingdom of heaven flips the totem pole, if you will, upside down. The last will be first and the first will be last. The master has the right to do what he wants with what belongs to him. And so Jesus explains to the disciples in Matthew 19 that even though they're like those hired from the beginning of the day, even though they're on the lowest end of the totem pole in this life, in the future, they will be repaid. But even though they're like those hired from the beginning of the day, they shouldn't allow themselves to begrudge the master's generosity. So it's interesting. The word translated begrudge here in Greek is literally like having an evil eye. Like, do you have an evil eye because of my generosity? And it's an idiom for jealousy. So it's, are you allowing yourselves to be jealous over my choice to be generous? That's what the master's asking. Jesus is warning the disciples not to allow themselves to become jealous of God's generosity toward others. So it's interesting. Some expositors take the laborers from the beginning of the day, the early morning laborers that worked the whole day, as the Jewish people, and then the laborers later in the day as the Gentiles. And this is a possible interpretation. It is even applicable, but I don't think it needs to be the primary application or the only application. The idea is this: the first will be last, and the last will be first. The rich young ruler in Matthew 19 seemed to be first in God's kingdom. It's interesting. Prosperity gospel is not a new thing. All right, it may not have been called prosperity gospel, but the idea that God blesses people he likes is not new. In fact, that is what they thought. They equated earthly possessions and status with God's favor. So in their eyes, this rich young ruler must be beloved in the eyes of God because look at his wealth, look at his status. The rich young ruler must have been esteemed in God's eyes, but God explains that it isn't those with possessions that are rewarded in the kingdom, but those who follow Jesus, even when they have nothing. And so Jesus is giving encouragement to the disciples that, hey, the first will be last and the last shall be first. But lest the disciples then assume that they're going to be above others in the kingdom of heaven, Jesus continues to explain that all rewards given are actually an act of grace. They're not deserved. And that even those who are called to labor much, much later will be rewarded according to God's good pleasure. And so Tom Constable states it like this. He says, the point of the parable was that God will graciously do more for some of those who work for him than his justice demands. His servants should serve him while trusting in his graciousness and goodness toward them, rather than trying to calculate how much he owes them for their service. Guys, it is all about grace. It's all about grace. But at the same time, though Scripture is very clear that some will receive more in heaven than others, we know this, that some will receive more rewards in heaven. So what is the point of this clarifying parable? I like the way another theologian put it. He says, this parable teaches that service for Christ will be faithfully rewarded, and that equal faithfulness to one's opportunity will be equally rewarded. However, only God can adequately assess faithfulness and opportunities, and thus human judgments may be reversed. So if you find yourself working for the Lord for the sake of your own benefit, this parable serves as a warning. The first will be last. But if you find yourself wishing that you could do more for the kingdom, but serving faithfully with what you've been given, this parable is an encouragement. The last shall be first. All rewards and all blessings are gifts from God. So what are we to learn and apply from Jesus' words? That the first will be last and the last first. These are your key takeaways. Number one, those with prominence now are not promised prominence later. I won't lie to you. I struggle with this one a little bit. All right? It is very tempting for me to assume that faithfulness is measured by the prominence of the platform. When you look at other pastors, all right, when you look at other laborers and you go, wow, that's a huge stage. That's a huge platform. Clearly they are being more faithful, all right? That is not the case. It is tempting for me to chase notoriety over faithfulness, okay? But it isn't ever about prominence. It's about faithfulness. So that's number one. Those with prominence now are not promised prominence later. Number two, faithful service to Christ will be faithfully rewarded. Faithful service to Christ will be faithfully rewarded. And so you may struggle in a similar way that I do, assuming that because I'm a pastor and you might be in the business world, that my rewards will be greater. I don't think that's the case. I really don't think that's the case. Only God is able to know the level of opportunity and faithfulness of each person. I've often argued that the people with the most reward in heaven will not be the people with the biggest platforms. I don't think it's going to be the famous people that are closest to the throne, if you will. I think, and I'm convinced that the people in heaven with the most rewards are going to be people that we've never heard of, whose names have never been in the spotlight, but who have faithfully served with what they've been given every single day of their life, because it is not about the platform, it is about your faithfulness. But let me remind you that while faithful service to Christ will be faithfully rewarded, it is never what you deserve. It is always, any reward is an act of grace. All right, and so that's your third takeaway. Any reward is an act of grace. Because it is even an act of grace that you've been called to be a laborer. You do not deserve to work in the master's vineyard. You do not deserve to work for the kingdom of heaven. But God, in his graciousness and his love and his mercy, while we were still sinners, died for us. So the fact that you've been called is an act of grace. The fact that he would repay you for your work is an act of grace. Any reward in the kingdom of heaven is an act of grace. You, each one of you, are a laborer for God's kingdom. And so whether you have an hour, 6 hours, an entire day, week, month, year, or a lifetime to serve, you are called to be faithful with the opportunities that you've been given. God will reward according to his grace and his good pleasure. So be faithful. Be faithful. Not to earn what you think you deserve, but to serve the one who bore on the cross what you actually deserved. You are a laborer for God. So you may have less time, you may have fewer resources, less status or education, but God is the judge of both opportunity and faithfulness. God is the master who rewards as he pleases. So stop looking at the people around you with jealous eyes. Stop comparing your platform to your fellow laborers and instead be faithful with what you are given and be thankful for undeserved grace.